Valorant's meta is constantly evolving with every update, patch, and balance change. Just when you think you've got the perfect strategy, Riot drops a nerf or a buff that shakes up the entire game. With the recent changes to Viper and Cypher in Episode 8, Act 3, the dynamics have shifted once again, making some agents more viable and others a little bit less threatening. But don't worry, I've got you covered. Whether you're a veteran player or you're just starting out, this tier list will help you understand which agents rule the meta and which agents need a little bit more love. Hey guys, my name is The1ZK and I create all sorts of Valorant content, whether it's discovering different metas like we're doing today, or doing my Agent to Immortal series where I climb with every single agent in Valorant from unranked to Immortal. We're currently on our 7th agent in the Agent to Immortal series, so if you like that type of content or you like this style of content, make sure you guys subscribe and follow the Twitch stream over at twitch.tv/The1ZK. Now let's dive into the tier list and see which agents are dominating the current meta. All right, so to start this tier list off, I actually want to start with Valorant's newest agent, Clove. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm actually taking Clove from unranked to Immortal right now, and I have a little bit of a hot take regarding Clove. While I do think they're a very strong agent, I do think they're significantly overrated. Now listen, I appreciate the fact that Riot made an agent like Clove because it definitely makes playing the controller role a bit more enjoyable and fun. But when you're comparing Clove to another agent like Omen, I just think Omen outshines Clove in almost every single way. And for that reason, I'm gonna put Clove into the B tier for now. Let's stay with the theme of controllers and knock all of them out first. Let's go with Viper next. Now, prior to this patch, Viper has been one of the strongest agents in Valorant for such a long time. And what makes Viper so good is that she's almost a hybrid between a controller and a Sentinel. Not only is Viper good with dividing the map and taking map control, but she can anchor a site extremely strong with her poison orb and mollies that make you vulnerable upon contact. But with the most recent patch, Viper did get nerfed. She only has one molly now, and her smoke time up is significantly reduced. If I were to make a tier list from each of the past 3 or 4 acts, Viper would have been undeniably S tier. And while I do think the nerfs did quite a bit, I think people are overreacting a little bit to how much she actually got nerfed. Viper's vulnerable molly and decay from the orb and wall are still really strong, and so for that reason, I'm gonna put Viper into the A tier. Let's move on to an agent that's a little bit out of the current Valorant meta. This was the first agent that we completed in the Agent to Immortal series, and that is Astra. Long gone are the days where Astra had 5 stars and her gravity well was one of the strongest abilities in Valorant. And while I do think Astra still has a spot in a double controller team comp and on very specific maps such as Split, I think there are other controllers that just outshine her a little bit more right now. And so for that reason, we're going to put Astra into the C tier. For the next controller on the list, we're going to talk about one of the strongest in the game, and that is Omen. To me, out of all of the traditional controllers, so this excludes Viper and Harbor, I just think Omen brings more to the table than all of the rest of them. Not only do you have regenerative smokes, but you have one of the best abilities in all of Valorant with Omen's Paranoia. Omen's Paranoia makes the agent almost a hybrid of a controller and an initiator because Omen's blind is so good on site takes and retaking when you're on the defender side. So for this reason, we're gonna put Omen into the A tier. Our last controller of the video is gonna be Brimstone. And while I do think Brimstone is a relatively weak agent when it comes to pro play on most maps, his smokes always prove worthy on certain maps in the game like Bind and Fracture. And I know Fracture's not in the current map pool, but as soon as Fracture comes back, we're going to see Brimstone as the main controller just like he was way back when. The disadvantage to Brimstone compared to Omen is that his smokes don't regenerate over time. You simply get 3 per round. For that reason, I'm going to throw Brimstone into the B tier. I actually do think he's a little bit stronger than Astra across a couple more maps. And now that I think about it, we actually have one more controller to cover in this list, and that's Harbor. Harbor is really interesting because I think he's one of the worst agents in the game when it comes to being a solo controller, since he doesn't have any stall ability. When you think about Omen, Omen has a Paranoia to stall on CT. Brim also has a molly to block the choke point. Astra has the gravity well, and of course Viper has the snake bites. But when it comes to Harbor, he's the only controller in the game that has absolutely no stall ability. Some good utility from the attackers can simply burst through that wall, and if their utility is on point, then you have no way to slow them down. With that being said, I actually think Harbor's really underrated in a double controller comp. Over the last few acts, we've seen countless teams use double controller with both Harbor and Viper, and Harbor's Cove ability has been really good when it comes to helping to get a safe plant down or when retaking and defusing the spike. If I could make 2 separate tier lists for both pro play and ranked, I'd probably put Harbor into the C tier for ranked and the B tier for pro play. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to put Harbor into the C tier. Next up, let's cover the Duelists. There's a couple of agents here that, in my opinion, don't really need any explanation on why I'm placing them where. One of those is being ISO. Gonna throw them right into the D tier, and the other one is Reyna. Same exact thing. These agents provide very little utility for the team, nor do they create any space, which is often vital on the Duelist role. Not only that, but they're extremely selfish agents. So if you're not absolutely fragging on both of these agents, you're really providing absolutely no value to your team. Next up, let's go to the C tier where I'll place Phoenix. Now, I think where Phoenix shines bright is with his ult. Phoenix's ultimate is only 6 ult points, meaning if you're voluntarily grabbing orbs and planting the spike, you can recharge this ultimate every 2 to 3 rounds, especially especially if you're getting kills on top of it. And while the Phoenix Flash is really good, it is easy to counter. And again, this agent doesn't have the ability to create space, which is the advantage of other duelists compared to Phoenix. Next up, let's talk about Neon. We've seen certain teams like Team Heretics rock the Neon in their team comp and make her look really good. But she's such a niche agent that requires so much practice that it's very hard to recommend her or put her any higher than C tier. In my humble opinion, Neon is one of the hardest agents to master in all of Valorant because of how big the skill gap is when it comes to her movement. So while I do think the best Neon players in the game definitely provide way more value than a C tier agent, I think most players that are rocking Neon just don't bring the best out of her. So for that reason, we're placing her at C. Next up, we have Yoru, who I'm going to place in the B tier. Now, slowly over time, Yoru has crept up as one of the better duelists in the game. Long gone are the days where VCT teams are picking Yoru in 0% of matches. Yoru is an intimidating agent, and one of the best aspects about Yoru is his ability to play mind games with the opposing team. And we've seen this more and more in VCT as Yoru continues to evolve into the current Valorant meta. Now, some things never change regarding the Valorant meta, and that's the best two duelists in Valorant, which are Jett and Raze. Despite continuous nerfs over time to both of these agents, these two agents remain at the top because of one sole reason, and that's their ability to create space when dashing or satcheling into sight. This helps teams execute bomb sites so much better. And within the current Valorant map pool, I look at maps like Ascent, Breeze, and Icebox as Jett maps, and the remaining 4 as Raze maps. So for that reason, I'm going to put Jett into the A tier and Raze into the S tier. Next up, we're going to cover the Sentinel role, which has seen countless updates over the past few years. When Chamber was first introduced to the game, everybody was rocking Chamber and there was no other Sentinel in the meta. And then after Riot nerfed Chamber into the ground, Killjoy became the primary Sentinel of choice. But after the recent Cypher buffs, it's really become a 50-50 toss-up to whether teams rock Killjoy or Cypher, and heavily depends on the map. But as we know, in the most recent patch and the release of Episode 8, Act 3, Cypher did receive some significant nerfs. Now, I entirely agree with Riot on the fact that Cypher's tripwires needed a little bit of a nerf, especially on their recharge time after they were activated by pieces of util or players. But one thing I'm really disappointed in is the change to Cypher's camera. The whole point of Cypher's camera is to be a spy cam, hence the name of the ability itself. So the fact that it now tells you when you're being watched by a Cypher camera just seems like a really noob-friendly change to me, and honestly, I'm pretty disappointed. As time goes on, I feel like we're really straying away from a Sentinel meta, which all in all isn't necessarily a bad thing, because there were countless times where you just hit a Cypher trip and you're insta-dead round over. But at the same time, all of the Sentinels are just becoming more weak and more weak. So for that reason, I'm going to put Killjoy and Cypher into the B tier. One agent that I think is severely underrated, especially in ranked, is Deadlock. Now, I've already completed Deadlock in the Agent to Immortal series, so if you've watched any of that, you would know my thoughts already. But the one downfall to Deadlock is that she doesn't provide any info, such as flank trips. And that's because her sound sensors can be entirely walked past if you just shift walk without making any noise. But other than that, Deadlock's crouch nade is insanely good, and her walls and sensors provide just enough stall to be a real pain in the ass to the opposing team. So for that reason, I'm going to put Deadlock to the front of the C tier. Another one of those agents that I don't really have to explain myself too much is with Sage. Unfortunately, I'm going to put Sage into the D tier, and while I do think her slow orbs can provide some value, there's a reason that no VCT teams are rocking Sage anymore. If you want to play an agent that has a lot of stall ability, most teams are opting for the double controller because, as I mentioned, Viper's a hybrid of a Sentinel and a controller in one. And in all honesty, Viper does the same exact thing as Sage from a stalling point of view, while still providing more on attack with the lurk walls and, of course, her poison orb. The last Sentinel we have to talk about is Chamber. Now, as I mentioned, Chamber got nuked into the ground quite a while back. And to be honest, I'm conflicted on whether I want to put Chamber into the D or the C tier. Because on one end, I do think Chamber can provide value in rank, especially with someone who's a really good opper, and if you're already rocking Raze as your primary duelist on a given map, meaning you don't have a Jett that's gonna op. But on the other end, I think you're just better off playing other Sentinels like Killjoy and Cypher. I guess we'll throw Chamber into the low C tier, but I think it could go either way. Last but not least, we have one of the most important roles in all of Valorant, and that is the Initiator. Now, last act, we saw a huge nerf and change to the Initiator meta. Sova, Skye, and KO had dominated the Initiator meta for quite some time, but after the nerf to Skye, where her flash no longer recharges throughout the round, so many teams started opting for the Gecko over the Skye. And the reason for this is because Gecko's Dizzy ability takes just 10 seconds to recharge, meaning you can use your flash ability every 10 or 15 seconds and constantly get info throughout the round. Now, I have one caveat with Gecko. I don't think Gecko's the best when it comes to having just one Initiator on your team. Gecko's one of those agents where you really need 2 Initiators to thrive. And that's one of the problems with ranked. Almost every ranked game, teams opt for the double duelist because it's simply more fun, as most Instalock, Jett, and Reyna players would say. And to me, as I said, that's where Gecko has flaws. If you're rocking Gecko as a solo Initiator, it's really not the best. But Gecko is so good when you compare him with a Fade, KO, Skye, or Sova. So for this reason, I'm going to put Gecko into the A tier. But again, I would probably put Gecko into the S tier if you could guarantee that you're going to pair Gecko with with another type of initiator. And if I didn't clarify this already, the reason Gecko needs to be paired with another initiator is because Gecko doesn't really have an entry assistant outside of the Flash. This could be like a Fade Prowler, Skydog, Recon, or Sova Drone. So yeah, with that being said, Gecko into the A tier. Another agent that continues to thrive no matter how many times they nerf the agent is Sova. There's only one time in Valorant history where I can recall Sova going out of the meta, and that's when Fade was first introduced to Valorant. Fade and Sova are very comparable in the fact that they both have some sort of dog or drone, and then also have a recon ability. Of course, Fade having the eye and Sova having the dart. And the only time Fade really outweighed Sova again was when Fade was first introduced to Valorant. But after they nerfed the Prowlers, we see Sova thrive on most maps over Fade. And of course, as of last act, Cypher was really in the meta, and Sova players shock darting Cypher trips would permanently delete the trips, whereas a Fade Prowler activating the trip would allow the trip to come back to life as soon as the Fade Prowler went away. So for this reason, I'm going to put Sova into the A tier, and I'm going to put Fade into the C tier. One of the most underrated ranked agents in all of Valorant, in my opinion, is KO. But the reason KO doesn't see so much love in ranked as opposed to pro play is because KO is another one of those initiators, just like Gecko, where you need two initiators to really get the most out of him. Because KO doesn't have a drone or a dog or something like that, it makes pairing KO with another initiator vital to really get the most out of him. But KO still has one of the best ultimates in all of Valorant, and if you can learn some supportive flash lineups to set up your teammates, KO's flash really becomes one of the best and most undodgeable flashes in all of Valorant. All it takes is a little bit of time in customs. So for this reason, I'm going to put Gecko into the A tier. Now, Skye was a former A tier initiator, mostly because you could get unlimited information throughout the round, because Skye's flash, which tells you if it hits someone or not, would regenerate as the round goes on. But now that Skye only gets 2 flashes per round, she's the only initiator in all of Valorant that doesn't have a rechargeable ability. And while I do think Skye is still viable on some maps, this nerf definitely hit her hard. And this is another one that I'm not too sure if I want to put Skye into the low B tier or high C tier. For now, we're going to put Skye into the low B tier because I do think she's really good still, especially in the double initiator comps like I mentioned earlier. And last but not least, we have Breach. If you watched the Agent to Immortal series, then you would know that I had a lot of frustrations with this agent. Now, Breach is the only initiator in all of Valorant that doesn't have some sort of info utility. Gecko has the flash, which squirts on people. KO has the knife, which regenerates. Sova has both a dart and a drone. Fade has an eye and a prowler. Skye has a dog and a flash that tells you if they're blinded or not, but none of Breach's utility gives you any information throughout the round. So for this reason, Breach as a solo initiator is extremely poor. Not only that, but Breach flashes are some of the easiest to turn in the entire game, as they make a charging up sound as they're penetrating through the walls. So for this reason, and as well as the fact that Breach's best map, which is Fracture, is currently out of the map pool, I'm gonna put Breach into the lower C tier. That's all I have for now, guys. What do you think of my tier list for episode 8, act 3? If you have any critiques, leave them in the comments below, and of course, please be respectful. And don't forget to follow the Twitch stream over at twitch.tv/the1zk. I'm currently making the grind for Radiant on my main account, which I've never been before, while simultaneously grinding the Agent to Immortal series, where we take every agent in Valorant from unranked to immortal. And as I mentioned earlier, we're currently on agent number 7, Clove. So if that's something you want to see, go drop a follow. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.